Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Subscription Scaled. I'm your host, Nick Frederick. With me today is Josh Mathers as co-host of a very special episode about analytics and reporting. We are joined by a panel of special guests that we are excited to have on who are going to help us dive into this very important topic. And let's just start with some introductions, a little bit of background on yourself and your company. And maybe let's start to my left. Melissa, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. Melissa Shields. I am the Executive Director, Head of Payments and Strategic Marketing Operations for Dotdash Meredith. We're the largest print and digital publisher in the country. And I support all of our payments businesses, as well as our auto-renew subscription operations and digital editions.
You got a lot you're responsible for there. I'm sure you got some great insights today.
Yeah. You might know us
Awesome.
from brands like People Magazine and Real Simple and Better Homes and Gardens. And some of those are our more public-facing brands that folks might know.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Jay, over to you.
Sure. My name's Jay Matthews. And again, thank you for having me. I work for Yahoo. I'm the Director of Global Payments and Retention. I started with AOL back in the late 90s. I'll just leave it at that. And I've been in payments ever since. We sell a variety of products, which are primarily safety and security products, mail products, and things like that, on the subscription side.
Awesome. Well, good to have you on. Thanks for coming on, Jay. Melanie, over to you.
Hi, Melanie Stout, Head of Recurring Payment Strategy at Optimized Payments. I got my background started on payments about 26 years ago, working for a company called Connect Group, which is now actually a part of Dotdash Meredith. So Melissa's very familiar with that business. And at Optimized Payments, our mission is to uncover and unlock the hidden value in electronic payments. And that's really key to what we're talking about today is how the payments data can be a revenue driver for organizations.
Awesome. Well, good to have you on as well. I'm sure you'll bring the perspective of lots of different merchants. So good to have you with us, Melanie. Josh, I'll kick it over to you to help us dive into this topic.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm really looking forward to the episode. So I guess let's maybe start high level. So for listeners who might be new to this, why is analytics reporting crucial in the context of kind of subscription billing payments? Melissa, maybe you want to start us off and kind of give us your perspective on that.
Yeah, pretty much it drives everything I do for my team, whether it's the subscription side or the payment side. We really, focus on all aspects of the data for not only the billing side or what we consider our subscription or auto renew reporting, but also payments, because it drives everything from sourcing, lifetime value, fulfillment performance, and other aspects of our business. And forecasting is very important, especially in subscription and publications, because we are audited. So we have to make our forecasts and our numbers because we are audited to ensure that we are reaching the audience that we promised our advertisers. So being off in forecasting and not knowing your data would be very detrimental to our business, because we would then have to source very expensive other sources in order to meet our rate-based requirements for auditing. So data is everything in our world in terms of managing our subscriptions.
Great, Jay. What are your thoughts on why it's so crucial? How do you use it?
Well, for me, it's funny. There's a GM in this company. He calls me the money guy. And it's really, for us, it's as simple as like, what's going in the bank, and are we meeting our maximum billing success rates? So as I manage this piece and the data that comes with it, it starts for me at the it starts for me once the customer's converted. It starts for me at the initial billing success, right? I threw some transactions out the door. Did they succeed or not? If they didn't succeed, then what do I do, right? If they did, it's all good. But if they didn't, what do I do? And then you get into the transaction recycling piece. You start looking at chargebacks, refunds. And then once you get beyond that, I have to start looking at, well, what are we doing with the customer in terms of messaging, right? Because once I've done everything I can do on the back end, account updater and all those other good things, then it gets down to, how do I get the customer to update without losing that customer in the flow, right? So you message them, you do the best that you can, you time the messaging. And I think that's the crucial piece, because at the end of the day, it's like I said, it's what are we collecting versus what are we losing? What are we leaving on the table?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Melanie, I know you've seen this kind of across merchants. What's your perspective and what do you see kind of common out there?
That payments is how everyone makes their money, right? So if you're not able to accept payments or accept them successfully, none of us will have a salary, none of us will get paid, and the companies will go under. So it really is a critical piece to any subscription merchant's business and operations. The data that's in your payments can actually also drive profitability. You can use a lot of elements of that data to inform upstream marketing, downstream marketing, from acquisition to retention, measuring profitability, lifetime value, understanding also your consumers. If you're seeing certain behaviors in payments due to trial offers or low intro offers, perhaps you adjust how you're approaching those consumers. Or if you see that consumers are paying in a different way, perhaps they are adjusting how they're paying to meet your price point. So there is a lot you can do for your business as a whole. A lot of different departments are impacted by what is really truly happening behind the scenes underlying that consumer behavior that manifests as a payment.
I'm curious. We just said all of you review data as part of your job, like it's the lifeblood of what you do. But I am curious who else in your organization cares about that data, or who do you meet with to review it? Does it go all the way up to your CEO? Do they care about the payments data, like the nitty gritty, what we build, what we collected, or do they see very, very high level? And maybe Melissa, start with you.
Well, we kind of look at a variety of pieces of data and they go to different audiences, right? So for our subscription aspect, we have our explicit churn data, right? For the hand raisers, right? The customers that are contacting us to say, I don't want the subscription anymore for various reasons. And that data typically goes, within the channel, because that's really important to the marketers. We need to be able to figure out why people are canceling. And it goes to product, inform product in our editorial team to help understand what could we be enhancing with the product in order to eliminate that kind of subscription based churn from customers that just, are asking to cancel. But then, as Melanie alluded to, implicit churn is so important as it relates to, we look at everything from payments to fulfillment. So fulfillment is a different animal, whether we can't deliver physically or have a digital issue. But the payments churn is huge. Typically, businesses see anywhere from 10% of their overall churn from payments up to 50%. So it can vary widely, and it can vary for different reasons and from different sources. So on that aspect, certainly everyone has an eye on it. We're focusing on profitability, lifetime value is really how it proliferates when it gets up to the top levels, where we are looking at how that is impacting overall profitability for the company based on what we're able to build and also what we're able to save. Everybody kind of jokes that my job is, basically solving problems and finding money. And that's exactly what I do. I have to oftentimes find very large sums of money, and we can do that with payments because there are different levers that you can pull. And understanding your data helps you understand the interoperability of that. And then finally, there's really even a third kind of type of data that we're looking at in today's world for subscription, which is hybrid payments data and customer cancellation data. Now you have programs like VSPS from Visa or the new MasterCard Sabio program, or companies like Rocket Money, formerly Truebill, which are allowing customers to cancel via their payment channel. So it's really a hand raise cancel from the customer, but it's coming to you through the payment data. And understanding it's not always very clear how that's coming to you. So understanding your data to those very detailed nuances really impacts your overall numbers that you're presenting. And that's where, even Treasury and the controllers audit, they're all very interested in that data as well to try to understand where the money's coming from and where the stoppage of the cash flow is coming from.
Awesome. Thanks for that perspective. Jay, who do you discuss the payments data with?
Honestly, I hate to say this. Back in the day when we were much bigger, we would have regular monthly executive reviews, and we would pull a lot of that data and we'd share it with executives. And really what we had to do was tie down to the churn, right? Over the years, we've gotten smaller and smaller. The payments team went from, 7, 8 people down to me. And I'm the one that seems most concerned over the payments data itself, right? We do still have regular meetings with our GMs on, to Melissa's point, on churn, right? So if churn is increasing, whether it's cancel churn or billing related churn, which we break the two apart. When I'm focusing on billing related churn, if it goes up, I have to explain it. And therefore now I have to go back to the pipe and be able to explain it in a way where our executives can understand it. But really I'm the consumer of our dashboards. I'm the consumer of the data. And then I'll present some of that data in a way that helps them understand either how well we're doing with billing churn or how we're not. And there's so much more data out there, right? And there's so many things happening, like Melissa just pointed out, in the industry. And it's not just that; it's all the changes in the billing failure codes and how those have changed over the last 2 years. The merchant advice codes, the visa category codes, the issuer codes. What can you get to and what can't you get to, so you can explain it. But it's getting down to me, myself, and I.
What I just heard from the two of you. And it made me go back to my days on the merchant side as well, is you were talking about mostly what can go wrong. Like you said, found money, Melissa. So a lot of times I think it feels like in payments, you're the ones they go to when things go wrong. Like you basically start with 100% collections and kind of work backwards from there and have to explain why you don't collect from every single customer that's on the books, right? So sometimes it feels like a thankless job, unfortunately. But I guess that's somewhat the reality of the position. I know for you, Melanie, you guys work with dozens of different merchants and provide basically payments data and analysis as a service. But when you're meeting with them, talking about what you're seeing, do you meet with executives? Do you meet with people that are in the weeds, a mix of the both, or what's it like for you guys?
Yeah, it's a mix of the both. It's interesting. The way Melissa framed it is how some of the more sophisticated payments focused companies whose DNA is built on understanding the subscriber and making sure that they always keep their subscribers. But there are a lot of organizations, including those that are multi-billion dollars a year, who don't have the same sort of discipline or understanding of the importance of payments, right? And so for some of those organizations, payments is just a subset of treasury or finance. For others, they have an actual payments department, right, where these people are dedicated to and focused on it. But we do work with anywhere from, payments manager, operational manager, finance, to marketing departments, CEO, chief marketing officer, a lot of product. A lot of organizations now have payments as a product. And so that's sort of like the chief product officer would be someone we would work with. And technology is always impacted too when we're looking at their tech stack and what kind of data they're able to access and how their platforms are interacting with each other, to be sure that they're able to leverage the data, access the data that they need at the proper source. So CTOs definitely get involved as well.
And if I can jump in there too, as well, it's what Melanie said. Melanie and her team actually helped me, because I have been like Jay, me, myself, and I for a very long time running payments here as well. But it is important to really understand the technology. And I think that that's something that gets lost in understanding your order flows and how that impacts the results that you're seeing in the data. Because it's going to be different. And if, your product team is set to, deliver technology, but you have to understand the repercussions of how that technology flow is going to impact your data, and it's going to impact your payment success, and it's going to impact your numbers. So things like, understanding the nuances of what code's going to come back from a VSPS service from Visa versus something was wrong with the way you sent the transaction is really critical to help inform them how to do that, because many times those product teams, as organizations have gotten leaner in the years, are doing many, many things. Ours does marketing, front-end acquisition, fulfillment, and payments, all with this very small team of really great individuals. So they really rely on the payments team to wear multiple hats. So we work with treasury and help explain the cash flows and build that out. We work with audit. We work with again, our marketing fulfillment partners, and payments is really ingrained into a lot broader ecosystem than people, I think, originally kind of assume, where it might just be like in finance or an accounting role. That's where, folks like Melanie's group or other teams can really be instrumental in trying to identify all the different opportunities that you might be missing if you're not reaching into all those different areas.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I also, it's my time at different merchants and different roles, right? I feel the billing payments role kind of can shift into different groups, right? And what I learned in that is there's this technical understanding of how everything goes together, but it's really understanding who in your business you're talking to, right? Like when I talked to our support group, they were interested in like, well, how many decline notices are you sending to how many people? Who's going to call it? What's going to happen, right? And so there's a conversation you have there where marketing, it's completely different, right? And so you have to understand a little bit of the whole business in order to get your data to mean something to the people that you are talking to, right?
Yeah.
It's an interesting balance that you have in this type of role typically.
It's
Yeah.
funny you said that too, because like in the roles that I've had at this company, I started off in what they used to call member services, right?
Yeah.
And then they took our entire group and they shifted us over to renewal and payments marketing, right? So now all of a sudden I'm having that conversation, or they shifted us into revenue accounting, and even though I was looking at exactly the same thing, the explanations that I had to give to those groups were completely different. Because to your point, in member services, it's focused on churn. In marketing, it's focused on messaging. In revenue accounting, it's focusing on what's going into the bank. And so with every single group and everyone I reported up to, it was always operations. It was what's happening in our call centers, right? So it's because if billing fails and it starts failing at a massive rate, the calls pick up because people are trying to understand, why can't you bill me, right? Or why are you messaging me?
Definitely. So I guess as you guys kind of sit there and you think about this, what are your thoughts on the critical kind of KPIs that matter, right? For a merchant that's maybe just getting started, they have some data, they need to start somewhere. Where do they start? What should they focus on in this role? Jay, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start from a real high level because I know Melissa and Melanie have like tons of other things that everyone's looking at. For me, it's from a payments perspective, I'm looking at what's the initial billing success rate. I don't want to even call it the authorization rate. I want to know how much I'm successfully billing when I throw that payment out the door for the first time. And then after that, I watch the success rate after recycling, right? So, because I've got a strategy and I want to know how much I'm picking up. And then once I get beyond that, it's chargeback rates, it's refund rates, because of course you have to watch, especially your chargeback rates. You got to make sure that your products are maintaining a chargeback rate that's within what the card brands want to see, so that you don't end up on some monitoring program that you don't want to be on. And then after that, it is the retention rate. It's the churn rates that we look at, or that I look at. I think those are the highest level metrics that I'm looking at.
Melissa, what do you see?
Yeah. So I'll just kind of build a layer on some of the ones Jay had already hit on. Definitely that conversion performance by payment method and by channel. So we break it out to try to understand, what is the payment preferences. I'm still working on trying to get more ML and AI in there of predictive. We're not quite there yet, but certainly working towards that to try to be able to, as all these payment methods are expanding, what's the right one to present when and where, right? To make it easy. And churn, to expand on that a little bit, churn reasons and timing. When I initially built out our auto renew flow reporting, we really wanted to see, what are all those different points that customers are canceling? Is it pre-notification? Is it after the notification? Is it earlier but payment based? Like a card went bad. We got a billing agreement cancellation from a PayPal consumer where they went in and canceled their recurring subscription. Did we get an update failure early when we're periodically updating to keep fresh cards? What are all of those reasons? And the timing has been very important. So we have a whole kind of, group of churn reason metrics that we keep into our KPIs. Renewal rate at its core is a super important, simple metric that we provide up the ladder. So that one is always really important to have. But not only have renewal rate as a single number, have it as by tenure and by bill period. So effectively, if a customer has been on file longer, what's their likely rate to churn? And how does that churn ecosystem change from being more of a hand raiser churn to being more payments related, where it's more likely their credential's going to fail than they're going to call and cancel because we know they like the product, they've been on file for a while. Additionally, bill period. You might have great settlement monthly, what seems to be great settlement and low customer churn when you're billing monthly because you can bill in smaller payment chunks. But I'm kind of an evangelist for looking at your overall tenure or term, excuse me, to look at whether monthly, semi-monthly, or semi-annual, quarterly, or annual makes more sense. A lot of times people forget about that compounding factor of that churn, and you'll often find longer term billing at lower rates can outperform monthly depending on if your business can tolerate it. So it's really looking at all of those factors. Revenue per point. I'm a big proponent of this for different folks on my team. We're a very small team, but it helps us easily size the opportunity when we're trying to get on roadmaps. So understanding if moving to network tokens is going to buy you, what the value of that is per point, and then how many points you think you're going to garner from that move. Obviously the costs, as Jay already alluded to, which all those factors lead into our LTVs. We do regularly report on LTVs by channel, lifetime value, and then also look at price elasticity as part of the LTV work we do. So we do have elasticity numbers. I know this is kind of in the weeds, but for people who are just thinking about what is it they're going to want to know, I think that it's important to think through, all of the things that will help you tell your story and get the support or make the changes that you need to optimize your business. And pricing is a huge factor as it relates to payments, because your ability to settle payments, especially with credit floor or insufficient funds, is going to also influence your pricing strategy. So you really need to have all of that combined when you're looking at all of your metrics.
Yeah, sounds like a lot, right? Like,
It is. It is a
where do you
lot.
start? And everywhere.
Yeah.
Melanie, what do you see when you're talking to merchants? What do they find most important? What do you feel like you guys are really building out for everyone?
It's the most basic information you must have, especially if you're just starting off, is you have to know your decline reasons and your payment method mix. So that's kind of the bare bones. And ideally, you get granular into that. And going back to Jay's point, really understanding your recovery strategy. If you can look at your every attempt you do by decline reason, look at your success rate by attempt. And then when you layer in profitability, so if you have your 10-cent fee for trying a Visa category 1, how many times should you be trying that particular category 1 code to still be profitable because you're still getting some recovery on those? So when you can get more sophisticated to really measure the profitability of attempt, of recovery by every decline reason, that's a pretty critical piece of information from a payments perspective. But then, yes, again, going back up to upstream and looking even at your chargebacks, you have to understand that and how it ties into your lifetime value, whether it's fraud or just, consumers not understanding what they were engaging into. Measuring all of that information is critical for your entire business, right? So looking at what you're doing up front. To price point, like Melissa said, lower price points will typically have more debit cards. Higher price points will skew toward credit cards. Understanding that is important too. And seeing your mix of American Express versus Visa, MasterCard, Discover, that all plays into your expense, but also your lifetime value, because retention can typically be longer on some of those payment methods than on others.
I think it'd be good to get into like what decisions you guys are making off of this data. But before we go there, I think what a lot of people are probably asking themselves right now is, where's my data? Because it's common to think that your gateway or acquirer have it, and they do have a lot of data, but they typically don't have the full picture, right? There's a message that you send to a payment processor that includes what they need to process the payment transaction, but doesn't necessarily include things like tenure, vintage, or bill cycle, some things like that can really give you some valuable insights. So where does your data live? And how do you bring it all together? And maybe Melanie, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, the raw truest data is really with the issuer, but it's obviously hard to get that actual data back. So not every processor behaves the same. Processors will get information back from an issuer, and they might merge some of the decline reasons into a bit more of a generic one. There are also gateway layers that aren't truly acquirers, but they connect to an acquirer. So the more vendors you have in your mix on your pathway through the journey to get to the issuer, who is really the holder of truth of the card, can obscure some of the information you're getting back. But ideally, your processor will be the one who's responsible for giving you the correct and the truest information you can get. It is possible from a lot of processors to get the raw issuer response code. So instead of getting processor mapped code, you're actually getting what Visa has indicated the issuer should be saying. So it's a 2-digit code versus a 3-digit code. If you can get back the merchant advice codes from MasterCard and some of the other details back as well, that is really important. But typically, it is your processor. They are the one who owns the relationship with the issuer and the networks. So that's where you should be getting information back. Organizations who have an outsourced billing platform may rely only on the billing platform, but then you also have to understand how that billing platform is integrated to your processor, and are they able to receive all of that information back for you as well?
Jay, what about you guys? Where you talked about you're pulling a whole lot of data in. What are your sources?
Yeah, so we, twofold, right? One is exactly what Melanie just said. It's coming from processor. The other piece is coming from an internal source, and it gets back to what Melissa was talking about. So when I'm looking at conversion data and tenure and demographics, that's all internal. That's data that we collect. And when I'm looking for billing related data, that's all coming from our payment processor. And I think I've been fortunate in this business because years and years and years ago, we built a data platform that was really to be used by revenue accounting, but I worked in revenue accounting at the time, so I got a say in what data was being pulled and where it was being stored. So that data still exists for me, and I built all my reporting on that. And it's funny. I mean, in my case, I'm not using external sources, so I had to go out and learn SQL. I had to go out and learn SAS. I had to learn to work with what's called MAW or Google Data Studios and things like that. I've used a bunch of different ones to build the analytics that I have. And I think the challenge is exactly what Melanie said. Things are changing out there. 10 years ago, we all knew what do not honor was. We all knew what credit limit was. We knew what lost stolen was. We knew what pickup was, and we knew what expired card was. Today, I don't get that. I get basically 2 codes for the most part. And now I'm having to try to figure out, working with my processor, how to ingest the merchant advice codes, which I get from MasterCard, the Visa category codes, and then whatever I can get back from the issuer. Because there's so many things going on, like with CIT, MIT, which is customer initiated, merchant initiated transactions. When we're all going in and making changes to that, we may see an increase in one of these 2 new decline codes. But it doesn't really tell me anything. It doesn't tell me what I did or what's happening so that I can properly understand that and make changes on my side to improve my billing success rate. There's a lot going on out there, and I won't even get into tokenization. I'll leave that to Melissa.
That's a good segue over to you, Melissa.
Yeah. So, I definitely echo what Jay and Melanie were saying about the data sources being so important. We definitely are like Jay, where we have internal, we have a homegrown billing platform. So much of our data comes from that, but we also have a third-party billing platform for a legacy piece of our business that we also get data from. So aligning all of that and really aligning the processor data is very complex, especially if you use multiple processors and you have to think about things like PayPal. You're not necessarily engaging through your processor for PayPal. In some cases, you have Apple Pay. How transparent is that? And do you want to be able to tease that out? That does come through your processor. Amex settlement doesn't necessarily show up in your processor data. So you really have to think about all of that. And when you're getting all of those data feeds in, it is not one report. There are hundreds of reports with different data fields. Sometimes, I mean, these have been built over years. So sometimes different data naming conventions on fields that really mean the same thing within the same processor. And you have to be able to align all of that and map it. So it does get complex. And then when you get into the level of interchange and trying to really look at what your transactions are doing, affecting interchange, especially starting out, I found it really helpful. We did use third-party fulfillment tool. We actually worked with Melanie and her team um, to do the payments data at a high level, because then we always had kind of um, a high level baseline to go to, right? We always kind of could tell the source of truth and have one quick hit place to get high level data. And then as time has progressed, we built our own internal and also leveraged some of their more complex uh, interchange data, because I don't want to get into the weeds on that if I can avoid it. But that being said, I think that adding tokens, like Jay was saying with MIT CIT, now you have vault additional data elements to identify, is this a tokenized transaction? We worked with Apple on their V2 product. We were one of their betas because, moving from DPAN, a device-driven token, to an MPAN, because we were seeing in the data that DPANs did not settle as well recurring because you get breakage when a customer upgrades a device. So, that's a lot of data to have and from a lot of different sources. So having kind of your quick hits, some of your high levels, like Melanie had alluded to, um, are so critical to just getting those solid first. And then I know I talked about a lot of details in the last question, but then starting to build on that and being able to integrate it with your other source data is really important. Because understanding that timing and those reasons, especially for decline recycling, earlier I mentioned that 1 point, understanding what the value of 1 point in settlement means for your company or 1 point in auto renew, you could easily pick that up with decline recycle. You could easily pick up 2 to 4 points in decline recycling, depending on what you're doing on the base level. So it could mean a lot of money. It could mean your hold to find for a year, just to do that right. So get those basics down and then build from there.
Yeah, I think, as you think through all of these different sources, right? And Melissa, you touched on this, but there's data transformation, there's uh, data mapping, joining, right, between all these different databases. So at the core of a lot of this, it's having those identifiers so you can say, hey, we're getting this from this third party system, and that's this transaction at our processor, right? And making sure that all ties together so you get that big picture. So as you are organized within your roles, does that role fall into you? Do you leverage another team, data warehouse, or some other group to help with that data mapping? Like, how do you kind of bring that together?
So again, at the beginning, I definitely leveraged third party support because I um, became a payments professional by asking, why do we pay so much one day during a product meeting
No
for a
good deed goes
transaction?
unpunished.
And that's how I became the payments person. And that and auto renew was my side job up until about 2 or 3 years ago. So I was membership a GM and a bunch of other stuff, as my full-time job. And auto renew and payments only became a real thing a couple of years ago. So I would say that a lot of that ended up flowing through me just because I had to understand all aspects of it. So as it came to our auto renew reporting, we actually worked with our fulfillment house to drive what we thought that should look like, which kind of evolved into the industry standard. And then we do have an external BI team, but we provide all of the mapping and the requirements. So we have to go into the details of all of the spec from all of the sources and link those together. And then my team also runs customer service operations and compliance as a result of how intertwined payments is with those things, because that data is important to know as well, especially for this very strict legal obligations you have to run a subscription business these days. So all of that does flow through us. We do work with a BI team because the data sets get too large, but often we end up building models by hand and then evolving them into larger scale programs.
Yeah. Yeah. Good information. Melanie, what do you generally see as you're working with merchants? How does this kind of handled if they're looking to do something kind of on their own?
Yeah, I mean, merchants usually engage us because they don't have the resources to do it on their own. So when I've been a merchant, it's been sort of a combination of all those things where the business owners, the people responsible for understanding the metrics would design what the analytics should be, and then data warehouse BI would go build them in a platform. At Optimized Payments, we are essentially that platform. So, years and years of analyzing, understanding, ingesting, and then normalizing data across all of the processors, so that we can provide either normalized data to our merchants or provide the normalized data in a dashboard analytics format. That the complexity of understanding like every mnemonic device, every mnemonic code for every interchange rate for every MCC is pretty overwhelming. Which is why when you're really looking at the fee structure and the authorizations, especially for anyone with multiple processors, and at least pretty much everyone we work with has at least a processor plus PayPal plus Amex. So at least you're looking at three kind of as the baseline. Um, it's a very complex system. We have clients who will have an entire BI team and yet still rely on us to do all of the normalization.
Yeah, makes sense. Jay, anything to add from your
Well,
perspective?
again, it's just, I think it's the difference in our size, right? So I've worked for companies with really large BI teams, and then I've worked with those BI teams to, help normalize data and help map it. And then I've worked for smaller companies, which is, I'll call us a medium-sized company now, where the internal data, the tenure data, the conversion data, that's all being handled by one reporting team, right? And so they'll provide me with the results of that. And then I'm mapping out the billing data with our engineering team. So, because I know what I need to see. But I have to do that in conjunction with Treasury, because technically I don't own that data source. It's just I'm a heavy user of that data source. So it really just kind of builds on what both Melanie and Melissa said. It's just, we do rely on internal and external sources. And in terms of the mapping, it's just getting harder and harder for me, because even though I think the industry is trying to make things, they think they're making things easier with like higher level billing fail codes and higher level groupings and things like that. To me, all it's done is reduce my visibility into what's really happening out there. So, now I'm just trying to ingest even more data that I'm going to have to figure out exactly what it means. And then, the one thing that we didn't talk about was fraud, right? So we do use some third parties for some things. Like my billing platform is homegrown, but the fraud tools that we use and things like that we also have to ingest that data, like, because we'll keep people from coming into our system because of fraud, is coming from another third party. So, and it's just layered on top. So there's a lot to manipulate out there and to understand.
One thing also I wanted to add to that, Jay, you just kind of sparked a couple of thoughts, is that, definitely be asking your processor for what data sources are available. One thing that we found over the years is that what's published as static reporting isn't necessarily all that's available. We found that there are kind of behind the scenes reports that might have been created for one merchant that aren't necessarily published or out there unless you ask for them. So make sure that you're asking your processor what you need X report, what is available out there that can provide some of that information. Um, you're not always going to get an easy answer. So it's also really important to connect with other merchants on that. So I think that that's really critical, and agree with Jay on the fraud piece. You're going to have a lot of other third party fraud data coming in as well, along with really understanding other processes, like, when a payment fails, a refund fails. Now you might have to cut a check because of the auth with refund initiative. So because of that, you now also have another data source to integrate to make sure that when that check was cut potentially from a different system. So adding all of that in it definitely gets more complex. But I just want to add, make sure you're asking your processor and asking other merchants what's out there, because I learn something new every day from talking to colleagues and talking to our processor.
As I've been listening to all of us talk today, it occurred to me that we've touched on a lot of different skill sets that you have to have in order to be kind of good in this role. Everything from down in the weeds, technical, being able to write a BRD, know the fields that you're sending back and forth with the processor, know what they mean, be able to talk to IT, all the way up to summarizing it for marketing people, for customer service, for finance, for legal. Our roles really span the entire business in a way that most, quite frankly, don't. So if you guys can offer any advice to somebody maybe stepping into this role or having been in it for a short period of time and is wanting to, kind of level up and become better at their job, what advice would you give them? What skills should they pick up? Where can they learn it? How can they get plugged in a way that's going to benefit them and help them do their job? And maybe Josh, let's start with you.
All right. I really think it's, maybe unfortunately it's just jumping in and understanding the data you have and curiosity. Like, you have to be curious in this role, and you have to ask questions, and you have to be willing to, sometimes I think, ask what you think might be a stupid question, right? Like, I should probably already know this. I have this role, right? You're internalizing a lot of that. And you just have to swallow your pride sometimes, be like, I don't know everything. Like, I'm new to this. I'm just figuring it out. And whether that's an internal conversation, a processor conversation, or, there's multiple conferences that are very helpful from an educational perspective. But going to talk to other merchants, and most, I would say in my journey and kind of payments and diving into the data, it's really eating, sleeping, being with that data 100%, looking at it, asking those questions. That's going to get you where you need to be eventually. And it kind of have to put some of these other things, right? If you're in charge of operations, or if you have the customer service plan or accounting, right? Wherever you're kind of falling into the organization, kind of have to put that a little bit off to the side. Say, I just have to spend time with this data to understand it.
Yeah. Curiosity is a really good point there. Just be curious about the data and ask the questions, for sure. That's great.
That was actually my main word, so I'll just jump in. Curiosity was actually my main attribute for success in this role. So I'm glad Josh also agrees, and you too, Nick. So yeah, if you see an anomaly, if you see something amiss in the data, you can't just dismiss it. You have to dig in and figure out why. And then you have to be relentless in getting that answer, because it's not always going to be easy. You might have to go to many different sources, different people, multiple people at your processor may or may not know. And the real critical element is not stopping until you have an answer that makes sense. And always questioning what information you're getting back. Does it jive with what you're seeing in the data? But making sure you understand or looking at the data, and anything you see, you're questioning and finding out more about.
Awesome. So we've got curiosity. Now we've got tenacity. Melissa, what are you going to add?
Well, I always joke with the team members that I've brought into payments that what we do is we're forensic data investigators. And that's pretty much what Melanie and Josh already alluded to. So really, the data drove my journey. Being a payments person, I started with the data and wanted to know why. And so I'm just kind of reiterating those same pieces. But the other thing I would say is, don't be afraid to fail, because quite frankly, you need to fail fast though, and use the data to identify when you failed and where you failed. But you're going to be solving a lot of problems. That's what you're doing in this role, is solving the problems. And then it's really cool when you get to that next step and you actually get to build and you get to improve and enhance. But you a lot of times start by solving problems. So there's going to be a fire a day and the data is going to get you through it. And you really have to rely on that data from all sides of it. But certainly getting your basics set so that you really have a true understanding of that, so that you can evolve. But the other thing I would mention is that, again, this isn't like other industries that I worked with for other types of businesses, where everyone in the payments industry who is a vendor or a third party has it figured out. A lot of times, when we were doing network tokens, we had 5 different answers within the same, we'll say, one of the largest card brands in the world. on how to do something. And there was some internal, batting a concept around, because I'm like, well, what happens when you cut a token midstream between a CIT and an MIT, and everybody had a different answer. Our processor had a different answer. Our token TSP had a different answer, and the card brand had a different answer. So don't take just one answer either. Get data from multiple sources. And to reiterate what Josh said, attend shows, talk to people. There are a lot of great resources out there. And some of the best things I've learned have been from organizations like Melanie's or Josh's, and then also going to these shows and literally talking to merchants for hours about what they did with their decline recycling when it was multiprocessor or whatever it was. Spend the time and don't be afraid to get people on speed dial and walk through problems.
That's great advice right there. And it reminded me, because I think we've all experienced this, is don't necessarily take the answer that you're given, especially if it doesn't make sense, because chances are you might have been given bad information or information without context, let's say sometimes. So yeah, keep digging in those situations. Don't always take that first answer. Jay, for you, if you could go back earlier in your career and give yourself any advice, what would it be?
Well, I think and one thing I would add to this is make sure that you've got a strong partner relationship with your third parties, with your acquirer. If it's a weak partnership, that's where a lot of your data is coming from, and you just really need to make sure that that they understand your business. We also make the assumption that all payments people are strongly analytic. I was lucky when I came into this world, because I was. I always was telling somebody the other day, when I first started, I knew nothing about payments. And I worked with a guy that was really strong in Excel, because we were all still using Excel, and we all still do. And then I worked with another guy that was huge into SAS and SQL, and I knew nothing about it. So I learned. So I think the other piece of advice I would give is you can't be afraid of getting into the weeds, because you're going to have to do it. If if you have a little more control over that data and what you're looking at, and you understand it, then it's easier for you to pull the data than to go ask another group, hey, can you pull the data? This is what I think I'm looking for. Because it seems to me that could be a really long process. Um, and that's if I could tell myself anything, it's that. It's just strong partnerships with third parties, and really just massively try to get into the analytics side. And if you're not strong in analytics, then find somebody in your organization who is, that you can partner with, right? Because you'll get the insight. You'll hear about what's happening when stuff starts going wrong. I'm hearing it as we're sitting here. I'm getting slapped on my why is this happening? Why is this happening? But you're really going to have to get into that data, because no one's going to understand it better than you. So I think that's it.
Yeah, that was a lot of great advice right there, guys. And I think about it, we've all participated in conferences together, and so many of us have very similar personalities, just kind of that want to dive in, understand, we meet up and we have conversations and get into sometimes very technical discussions around what's happening and why it's happening, and toss it out there. And often we all leave these conferences energetic about going back into our own data and looking at it and trying to figure out, is what I'm seeing here same thing Melissa was talking about? Because that helped solve my problem. But such valuable information coming from networking. And this episode is a perfect example of that, of bringing everybody together, sharing insights, which all of you have done, and we greatly appreciate it. I think listeners will have found this very valuable. We will be sure to put all of your contact information in the show notes for this episode, in case there are anybody that wants to reach out and ask some questions about what we talked about today. But once again, thanks to each of you for taking the time, for sharing your experience and your expertise. This has been a lot of fun for me, and I'm sure for Josh as well. So thanks for listening, and thanks for coming on, and have a good one.
Thank you.